Laura Hilton, 28, was a single mother trying to give her 5-year-old son, Alex, a stable life. She worked the front desk at a dentist's office until she was recently laid off. The paycheck had never been great, but it kept them going. Rent was high, and she was almost always late with payments because she chose food, medicine, and basic bills over handing money to a landlord. The landlord had been patient at first. He gave her extensions, quiet reminders, and warnings delivered with sympathy. But sympathy has limits. One freezing afternoon, after hours of walking around the city, handing out resumes, Laura came home to find the doors locked. The landlord had changed the locks, and all their belongings, clothes, toys, blankets, were stuffed into trash bags sitting on the snowy sidewalk. For weeks, she and Alex jumped from one friend's couch to another. But temporary help doesn't last. The homeless shelter had a long wait list with no clear timeline. Their savings were gone. They had 2 bus tickets, a handful of coins, and a little boy who still believed that his mother could fix anything. Laura's former coworker and friend, Jess, let them stay for 10 days. Jess tried to help, but her boyfriend hated it. He complained about the noise, the clutter, and the fact that Alex woke up crying from nightmares. On the 10th morning, while Alex watched cartoons, Jess pulled Laura aside. "I'm really sorry," Jess whispered, already tearing up. "He says it's either him or you two. I can't lose him." There wasn't anything to say. Laura nodded and packed their belongings quietly while Alex kept asking where they were going next. Jess pressed a $20 bill into her hand along with a half-finished box of cereal. She wished Laura good luck, though both of them knew luck had nothing to do with it. By noon, Laura and Alex were back outside, with nowhere left to go. It was late at night, and Laura sat on a freezing metal bench at the bus station. Her 5-year-old son, Alex, curled against her in a jacket that was too big and too thin for the weather. She held him tightly, trying to stop her own shaking. Beside her sat a trash bag stuffed with their clothes and a small backpack with a few crackers. Snow kept falling, wiping out footsteps almost as soon as they were made. People hurried past them, heads down and coats pulled tight. A few glanced over, then quickly looked away, like acknowledging her situation might drag them into it. Laura kept her eyes on Alex's messy brown hair, brushing the snow out of it, trying to keep him warm. Just one more night, she told herself. Tomorrow, I'll figure something out. But she had been telling herself that same line for weeks, ever since the eviction notice appeared on the apartment door. Laura felt invisible, like she existed only in the corners of people's vision. Each hurried glance, followed by a quick turn away, felt like a slap. They see us, she thought. They know a child freezing, and they still walk past. Shame sat heavy in her chest, mixed with a quiet anger she didn't have the strength to voice. Do I look that hopeless? That lost? She wanted to shout that she wasn't lazy, that she wasn't a failure, that life had simply hit harder than she could stand. But she stayed silent, holding Alex tighter and keeping her eyes on the ground. Her tears froze before they could fall properly. Every crunch of boots passing without stopping felt like another door shutting in her face. She despised needing help. She despised the pity from the few who looked too long. She despised the cold emptiness of everyone else. Mostly, she despised the feeling that she and her son no longer mattered to anyone. Hours passed slowly. Alex finally fell asleep in her arms, his breath forming small white clouds against her coat. Laura rocked him gently, rubbing his back to keep the cold from biting too deeply. Snow collected on her boots, the bench, and the trash bags that held everything they owned. The cold felt endless. She lowered her head and whispered into the night, her voice barely a breath. Please. Somebody. Anybody. Help us. Across the street, Richard walked with no real destination. At 38, he moved like a man carrying weight no one else could see. His coat was thick, but it didn't warm the cold that lived inside him. He had been walking for hours, letting the night freeze everything he didn't want to feel. His therapist called it avoidance. Richard preferred the word survival. Tonight, the falling snow was the only thing that matched how empty he felt. After a few minutes, he felt his shoelace loosen. He bent down quietly, retied it, and stood up again. That was when something caught his eye. Across the street at the bus stop, a young woman held a small boy close to her chest, rubbing his back as if trying to keep him alive. What were they doing out here at this hour? In this cold? Richard crossed the street and walked closer. A ripped plastic bag sat beside them. Trash? No. Personal belongings. The woman's lips were turning blue. These two weren't outside by choice. The child shifted and grabbed his mother's coat tighter. He was freezing. Something twisted inside Richard, sharp and familiar. That little boy's grip reminded him of another boy, one who used to cling to him the same way. A boy who wasn't here anymore. Richard stopped a few steps away, hands buried in his pockets. He wasn't someone who approached strangers, but remembering his son that passed away and looking at the plastic bag again. Personal items. Clothes. He did the math quickly. They were stranded. He swallowed and forced himself to speak. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice calm and staying far enough not to frighten them. "Are you two okay?" The woman looked up at him, green eyes cautious. Strangers usually meant danger or pity or both. "We're fine," she lied, voice raw from the cold. She was on the street. Being careful was survival. The boy peeked out from under her arm. "Mommy, I'm cold." Richard felt something in him crack. His first thought was simple: get them warm. The question was how to help without appearing to have bad intentions. "I'm Richard," he said. "What's your name?" He nodded toward a small plaza nearby. "There's a cafe right over there. Let me buy you both some hot chocolate." Nothing attached. Just warmth. She looked at him for a long moment, studying him, searching for danger in his face. Finally she mouthed, "Okay." She stood, took her son's hand, and Richard saw both of them shivering. He turned and led the way toward the cafe, the glow of its lights cutting through the cold, silent street. Inside the cafe, the heat felt like a blessing. They sat in a booth near the fireplace, and Richard brought over 3 hot chocolates and a muffin he quietly tore into small pieces for Alex. Laura wrapped her frozen hands around the warm cup, watching her son's face brighten at the sight of the marshmallows. "I'm Richard," he said again as he sat across from them. "Laura," she replied, still guarded. "And this is Alex." She studied him carefully. His eyes were kind, but tired, like a man who had fought his own battles. Still, she didn't understand why he was helping them. Why did he offer anything at all? She was exhausted, yes, and Alex had been shaking from the cold for hours. But she couldn't afford to let her guard drop. Not even in a warm room. Not even with a friendly face. She reminded herself, "We drink this, we warm up, then we go." Alex turned to her with a grin, chocolate smeared on his chin. Richard. Mr. Rex says hi too." He lifted the stuffed toy proudly. Richard smiled for the first time in weeks. "Hey, Mr. Rex." They talked about simple things, the weather, and Laura's old job at the dental office before she was laid off. Richard didn't pry. He didn't fish for details. And that alone made her even more cautious. When the cafe began to close, Laura stiffened. She tried to hide it, but Richard saw the fear flicker across her face. "Do you have somewhere you're going tonight?" he asked quietly. "If you want, I can call you a taxi." Laura stood, pulling Alex's coat tighter around him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "We don't have anywhere. We're out on the streets. Everything we own is in those bags." Richard looked at the little boy, Alex, now warm, a little happier. His lips no longer blue from the cold. He pictured them going back to the bus stop in this weather. He pictured a child freezing through the night. He knew he couldn't watch them walk out the door and pretend he hadn't seen. His words came out before he had time to second-guess them. "You do now." He looked Laura in the eye. "I've got a spare room. You can set whatever rules you want. I just don't want you two out in this cold." Laura's stomach tightened. She had heard similar offers before, always from men who expected something in return. But Richard's voice wasn't slick or hungry. It was steady, almost troubled. And Alex was dozing off against her shoulder, worn out from the cold. "No funny business?" she asked, her voice firm but tired. Richard shook his head. "None." Laura had almost no time to think. Her options were limited. It was either trust this stranger for one night or take her child back outside to freeze. She looked down and let out a quiet breath. Okay, sir. We'll take it. Thank you. She wasn't doing it for comfort. She was doing it for Alex. For her son, she would risk it. They left the cafe and walked 2 blocks to Richard's apartment building. They climbed 3 flights of stairs and stopped at his door. He unlocked it, stepped aside, and let them in. The place was large and neat, with a faint smell of old coffee. Blankets were stacked on the couch, and the heat kicked on with a low hum. Richard handed Laura a pile of towels and led them down the hallway. The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a wide bed and clean sheets. He pointed toward the bathroom. The shower's hot, he said. I'll make some soup while you clean up. Laura nodded, too tired and grateful to say much. The moment the door closed, Alex climbed onto the bed with bright, excited eyes. Mama, it's so warm here. And the bed is huge. Can we stay? Please. She managed a small smile. We'll see. They washed up, and Alex fell asleep the second his head hit the pillow. Laura tucked the blanket around him, smoothing it gently across his small shoulders. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, breathing in the warmth of the room, wondering what they had done to deserve help from a stranger. Thank you, she whispered into the quiet, unsure who she was thanking. A soft knock startled her. She opened the door a little. Richard stood there, hands in his pockets, voice low. Soup's ready if you want some. She stepped out and shut the door behind her. At the small dining table, the smell of chicken noodle filled the air. She sat down, tired but steady. Richard placed a bowl in front of her and stayed standing, as if unsure he had the right to sit. You don't have to rush, he said. It'll stay hot. Laura wrapped her cold hands around the bowl. Thank you. It smells good. She took a slow sip, then looked up at him. You always cook for strangers. He let out a small, sad smile. No, never. You're the first. He finally sat across from her, leaving space between them. I just didn't want you two out there, he said quietly. It must have been freezing. It was, she said. We stood there for hours. Nobody looked at us. Nobody stopped. I almost didn't, he admitted. But your kid, something about him. When he said he was cold, I thought of my own son. I couldn't leave you out there. I couldn't live with that. Laura looked at him. You lost him. He nodded once, slowly. 2 years ago. My boy was 5. Silence settled between them. Not heavy, just honest. Alex is 5 too, Laura said softly. Richard glanced toward the guest room. Well, he's safe tonight. That counts for something. Yeah, she whispered. It does. She finished her soup, washed her bowl in the sink, and said a quiet good night. Richard nodded, wished her the same, and headed upstairs to his room. The next morning, the snow was still falling in thick sheets. Laura woke to the smell of pancakes and Alex's laughter. She followed the noise to the kitchen and found Richard at the stove, flipping pancakes with dramatic, unnecessary showmanship, while Alex clapped like it was the best thing he'd ever seen. Mommy, Richard says I can have a big pancake. Laura leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. You can have that before we leave. Richard didn't argue. He simply pushed a plate toward her. Eat first. Then decide. What was supposed to be a short stay stretched into days, then a full week. The storm kept building, and so did the excuses to remain in the house. Laura noticed details she hadn't paid attention to before. Photos on a shelf of a small boy with Richard's eyes, around 6 years old. In one picture, a woman had her arm around Richard, but her face was turned away. A box of unused toys sat beside the couch. A child's drawing was taped inside the fridge door. Richard never spoke about any of it, but the silence around those items was deafening. She could tell he was carrying something heavy. One night, after Alex was asleep, Laura found Richard on the balcony, staring into the snow-covered darkness. She brought him a hot mug of tea and stood beside him. You okay? She asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was low. My life has not moved on since I lost my son, he said. It was an autoimmune disease. It happened fast. Too fast before we could find help. His voice cracked. My fiancé couldn't handle it. She blamed me for not catching it sooner. She left after our child died. Laura felt her throat tighten. I am sorry. And you need to stop blaming yourself. It wasn't your fault. He nodded slowly. Feels good to hear someone say that. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I just haven't said it out loud in a long time. I haven't healed. Not really. She placed a hand on his arm, steady but gentle. You're not empty, Richard. You're grieving. There's a difference. You won't forget him, but you can still heal if you give yourself permission to. He looked at her then, and something shifted in his expression. A quiet resolve settled in. That night, he decided to return to therapy and finally deal with the pain he had been avoiding. Weeks turned into months. Laura found a job at a daycare and started paying for groceries. Alex returned to school. A steady routine formed around them. Morning coffee at the kitchen table, homework in the evenings, Alex's bedtime stories, and Friday movie nights with popcorn. Laura eventually began to open up about her past, piece by piece, never all at once. She told Richard about her ex, a man who started with charm and ended with violence. The same man who hit her more than once, until she finally called the police and had him arrested. She fought for custody of her son, Alex, and won, but the process left scars she still carries. After the custody battle, the court ordered her ex to pay child support. Instead of stepping up, he ran. He left the country a few years later to avoid responsibility, leaving Laura to raise Alex alone. No money, no help, just silence. She told Richard about the low-paying jobs she had taken to survive, the long nights when she felt like she was failing, the fear that she wasn't good enough for Alex or even for herself. Richard didn't interrupt. He didn't look shocked or uncomfortable. He listened. He never judged her, never offered cheap sympathy, and never tried to fix her pain. When he did speak, it was only when it mattered, short, steady words shaped by his own harrowing experiences. Words from someone who knew what it meant to endure things you don't talk about unless you trust someone. One spring evening, almost a year after the night she first arrived, Alex was upstairs playing. Laura stood at the sink washing dishes. Richard dried them beside her, their shoulders brushing now and then. Hey, she said, cheeks slightly red. I saw a really nice place on my way home. I'd like to take you there sometime, if you'd want that. Richard paused, heart thudding harder than he expected. He set the towel down. I'd like that, he said. There are places I want to take you to. I don't want it to feel like I'm taking advantage. You came here for safety, not to deal with some guy hitting on you. Laura let out a nervous laugh. Richard, I've been trying to flirt with you for months. Not very well, clearly. And it was true. Richard's patience and kindness had only made her feelings stronger with time. She'd fallen for him without meaning to. He was good to her, good to Alex, and strong in a way that didn't need to be loud. He was also undeniably attractive, which didn't help her situation in the least. He stepped a little closer, careful. Laura, he felt the same way and had been holding back out of respect. The last thing he wanted was to push her or make her leave. She met his eyes. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. But I trust you. And I want this. I want you. Richard leaned in, and their lips met. The kiss was soft, slow, uncertain, like both of them were afraid to ruin something fragile. When they pulled back, their foreheads rested against each other. Laura whispered, "We have somewhere to go now." Richard smiled, eyes slightly wet. "Yeah, right here." Upstairs, Alex shouted, "Mom, Richard, Mr. X needs help defeating the robot army." They both laughed, their hands still linked, and went upstairs to join the small family they were becoming.